Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of I Like to Read with me, your host, Rachel Polanski. Today, I am super duper duper excited to be joined by Ariella Elovic. Ariella is an a blogger, Instagrammer, and author as well. She most recently published a graphic memoir called Cheeky. And Ariella, welcome to the show. If you'd like to expand on that introduction, and we're very happy to have you.
Hi, no, that was great. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
So Cheeky just came out, what was it, like a few months ago
In
or in
December. It
December?
feels like yesterday, but also a year ago. Time is very
Yeah, I
weird.
mean, technically it was last year, so you can
True,
say that.
true.
But so Cheeky is a graphic memoir, which is very, we don't see a lot of those types of books in terms of we see a lot of graphic novels. I think we see a lot of memoirs, but I don't think that marriage comes together very frequently. So if you like to speak a little bit more behind how that came together and what it was like to kind of tell your story in this unique format.
Yeah, I think for me, it worked really well to bring those two together because I think a lot of what I was working on in terms of accepting myself and getting used to my body and feeling more at home in my body was something that I guess when I started posting the work on Instagram, on the Cheeky blog Instagram platform, I kind of didn't realize how empowering it would be. I was mostly doing it because these were kind of thoughts I was having and conversations I was having with friends. So it was just on my mind a lot to, draw boobs with nipple hair and talk about it. But it was a really, really empowering exercise where it was kind of a fake it till you make it type situation of faking owning it. And, I think also the act of drawing my body and drawing my tummy rolls, for example, or stretch marks was a way to kind of say, like, this is what my body looks like, which was a scary thing for me to accept as a teenager. When I first got stretch marks, it was all about like the Mederma I could buy or whatever to erase it. So the act of actually painting it and showing myself the way I actually am was kind of just, taking control of that narrative and owning it, I guess.
I remember I wasn't into the Moderna, but there was like a Nivea anti-cellulite cream, or which was like some
Yeah.
bullshit like gel stuff. And I was like fifth grade and I'm like, okay, I'm going to put this on. It's going to work. I'm like, what? Like,
And
just
that's what's crazy.
all
We were
kinds of
so
absurdity.
young.
Right. And
Like,
it's like, it wasn't necessarily being marketed towards older. I mean, I don't remember, but it was literally like my mom. I don't know if they even know. My parents kind of probably were just like, whatever. But that's
exactly.
crazy that a 12-year-old or 11-year-old is like buying anti-cellulite cream. Like, what? And it doesn't even
Yeah.
work. Like that stuff doesn't, it's
No.
like, it's all like fake stuff. At least Moderna kind of works, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really crazy how when we're so young, we don't even think about these things. And I didn't even really remember that until I read your book. And then it brought back these memories of wow, there are these things that I used to do that were very acceptable at the time. And I feel like now if a young girl, we would just be like, oh my gosh, no, what are you doing? Hopefully.
Yeah.
What kind of are your inspirations behind both your writing and your drawing and your artistic endeavors?
I mean, there's definitely illustrators that I've looked up to that kind of Tara Booth is one of my favorites, and she does a lot of autobiographical, a lot of naked. Like I remember she has an illustration of trying to pee with a romper on in a stall and how you have to get naked.
Oh, I think I've seen that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I just really love how direct and emotional her work is. And so she's been a really big inspiration to me. And I think for the book, it was a lot of the conversations that I have with my friends, the yentas, as I call them, and just the sense of home and okayness that I felt being around them. And not even okay, but just it's really fun to have a human body. And without the gross things it does, there's not really much to talk about.
Right.
And it can feel very isolating. And no one has the body that we think we're supposed to have because that's just not natural. It's not human.
If you did, it'd be kind of concerning. It would be are you an AI? What?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And it's everyone has those sort of feelings and emotions. And if you don't, you're probably some sort of robot, but it, the taboo of talking about it and accepting it and understanding it is still so far from being like in the lexicon of okayness. I mean, I think we've come slightly a long way compared to, like the mid 2000s tabloids when, have you seen like
Totally.
the Britney Spears Hulu documentary?
Yes.
And I mean, we don't need to go into that in the pocket, but just the biggest thing of like the low rise jeans and the
Yeah,
fashion, like everyone was so thin and like thinness was in. And now if we saw those kinds of images and things, would be like, is this person okay? Like
exactly.
very just the style and the bodies were so different. And that was only like 15 years ago,
It
and
wasn't
stuff can
that
change.
long
It wasn't that
ago.
long ago.
Yeah. And even the way that we would talk to each other about our bodies, like my mom always did a really good job of like, it was a rule in the house and to our grandparents and family friends, et cetera, that my mom made a very concerted effort to say, please don't comment on my daughter's bodies.
Mm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's not whether it's good, bad, not even like even saying, oh, you look so good, even that. It's just creating this element of when you don't get that compliment, you're like,
Right.
okay, did I gain weight? But it's funny because I would complain to her as a middle schooler, like eighth grader, about feeling fat or feeling whatever. And meanwhile, I was heavily constipated. So of course I felt I was like bloated.
Right.
But I think, she was so solutions based. So she wanted to help me. And she was like trying to think, okay, well, what's a healthy way to do this? And so Weight Watchers was introduced to me. And it totally wasn't from a bad place, even. Like my mom was kind of like, Ariella's having a problem. How can I help her fix
Right. Like
it?
she didn't want you to lose weight or anything. She wanted to help you because you perceived it as a problem yourself.
Right. And so I hope that we're kind of moving to a space of instead of, and that's just a generational thing. Like I
Yeah.
think her generation just didn't have those types of conversations. And so I hope ours is moving to a place of if any of us choose to have children and one of the kids comes to you and says, I feel fat today, or I don't like that my stomach looks like this, et cetera, it can be well, why? Like, let's
Right.
investigate that. Let's unpack that instead of saying and kind of validating that fat is bad or hair is bad, et cetera.
Totally. And I think the two things go kind of hand in hand. I mean, weight is such a taboo issue, but also
Mm-hmm.
body hair. And then
Mm-hmm.
you combine them together because usually with puberty, I know I went through like a drastic transformation.
Oh, yeah.
And also, body hair. And the thing, everybody has different levels too. I think at least with puberty, you assume everyone's going to go through it in the same way, but I know like people can get their period when they're 10, people can get their period when they're 16, and same thing with body hair. It's like I just very recently like stopped shaving my thighs because I remember
Mm-hmm.
literally at camp, just like in your story, where like someone was shaving their thighs and I had never thought of that, but I was like, oh, that's something I should do.
Yeah.
And like literally, I was like, then like a few months ago, I was just like, why am I still doing this? Like, there's no reason to. And so I hope that people, younger girls can just kind of like understand like you don't have to do that from the beginning, and it's like
Yeah.
we're in an evolution. But then we look back to like even just the 70s and second wave feminism, and people
Right.
weren't shaving then. So kind of that, did you do any sort of like historical research to look into sort of the history of body hair and acceptance beyond just sort of like your personal experiences?
I didn't, but I think it would
Follow
be
up
fun to kind
GP2.
of do another dive in and kind of look at different moments in time or different icons, like even Julia Roberts it was probably in the 90s, that like famous, like she's waving her hand out to paparazzi and she has armpit hair. Like there was another like really classic actress, I forget who it was, but someone was circulating a photo of this woman who also had hairy armpits, but from like the 50s.
Wow. Okay.
So she was, maybe it was Sophia Loren though. I don't remember who it was, but it was someone, I think they were Parisian. But I think
Yeah,
it
it's
is
definitely
this
like a
interesting thing.
European thing to not
Yeah,
keep your body hair.
exactly. And like, is it a pendulum swinging back at some point, or is this kind of the last time? But again, like you were saying with the low rise jeans on TikTok, there's a whole thing of them coming back.
I like attribute that to why I was so miserable in high school,
Same.
because I'm like, first of all, like I hardly wear jeans anymore anyways, and if I
Yeah,
do, like they are pretty much like below or up to my belly button, like it's not
exactly.
going lower. And I'm like,
No.
literally, I thought like if it buttoned, it fits. And I'm just
Yeah.
like, it's really insane. And like
Yeah.
I don't know how. I mean, I guess if you are like a stick figure and you really don't have many curves, you can pull them off. But I'm just like, it's uncomfortable. Like you
It's
look at it and you're like,
uncomfortable.
how
Yeah.
is your pubic bone like that low? Or there's even, I mean, there's that image of what is it? One of the Jenners, Kendall
Oh,
Jenner,
Kylie
Kylie
Jenner.
Jenner, where
Or
she
maybe it's,
literally
yeah, whoever.
one of whatever. And it's like a Barbie, like literally, and
Yes.
you're like, you almost have to wonder, like, are they doing this on purpose? Like, they're just kind of like trolling us because, like, no, everyone knows that that's not realistic. And I know
No.
Kylie has had, or whatever, Kylie Kendall, they've had a lot of work done, obviously, but
Yeah.
still, it's like there's an extent to like what's realistic and what's not. And I think that like even young kids hopefully should know from that. That's like, I don't
That
know,
is a surgically created body.
surgically and also Photoshop because it's like we love to say
Right.
like, oh no, retouch it. And I think a lot of companies and brands have come a long way in terms of
Big
their
time.
like retouching and model. I just like, I don't know, like what was it, Cosmo Girl and like 17 and all of those. And like for
Hmm.
so I've all the models were just like sticks. But I think that
Yeah.
places have changed that a little bit. But it's interesting because I think in terms of the body hair component and in terms of like, okay, we've come a pretty, we still have loads to go, but for body acceptance, we've had this sort of like body positivity movement and there's, hashtags on Instagram, like fat is fabulous and hashtag
Hmm.
plus size blogger and all this, but we don't really see like hashtag like hairy is fun. And we
I
don't see like
know. I need more
hashtag
hair.
like love my pits or what like,
Hmm.
and do we think that's because like I don't know, do you think it's because there's something sort of like unnatural and sort of like still like unhygienic about it? Do you think it's sort of society is obviously telling us that this is bad, but do you think it's more of like a internal pressure or do you think it's like external? What do you think?
It's a really good question, and I think I was watching High Fidelity, the new one with Zoe Kravitz,
Mm-hmm.
which was great, loved it. And there was one scene where I think she was going through a breakup, and she like put her leg up on her coffee table, like it was just resting on her coffee table, and there was a few inches of skin showing on her leg, and it was completely smooth. And I was like texting my friends, I was like, there is no way in
Like,
hell
did you
that this
just
girl in
go get a
real
wax?
life,
Like,
like she has a hairy leg right now. Like
yeah,
it's winter New York. She's dealing with a breakup. Like she has hairy legs. And I think that's when I realized I was like, oh, we're still not for some reason there yet.
yeah,
And I think it just has to be a conscious decision. Um, yeah, I don't know. And I think like I was quarantining at my mom's house for the first half of, I mean, it's for the first half of the COVID year, I guess.
yeah. We're
And I
literally
just,
it's March 13th or
yeah.
whatever, like the one year. Crazy.
And I just completely stopped shaving everything. I'd grown out my armpit hair for a while and I love it. It's just so much more comfortable for me personally. But like my legs all grown out, my toe hair, everything. And I still felt myself like having a pressure
And
to,
it was like internal, like like no one was saying anything to you, or obviously, like it was just
yeah.
yourself, like feeling this weird
And
discomfort.
yeah, and I think usually because when I was writing the book, I was single for the entire time, not fully intentionally, but I just like wasn't dating. And it was a really nice like recalibration of how I want my body to look and feel for me.
Mhm.
But then when I started dating again, I did start to feel like, oh, should I shave my legs? Should I
Mm, mhm.
um I had to kind of think like, where is this coming from? And if I do feel like sexier if my legs are smooth, like am I allowed to do that? But then why
Right.
do I feel that way, and does it matter the why? And I think it's just and I had a part about this in the book with pubic hair of just kind of saying, it's okay to want to feel it out as long as you're aware of the fact that there aren't true like okay and not okay ways
Right.
to look. Because I think it's a process. I still sometimes feel like waxing my upper lip hair, and then other times I'm like, let's just let it go, whatever.
Right.
But I do wonder about the like cleanliness look of it or the professional look of it, because I think if I were going for a job interview, I
Right. And
don't,
you saw someone lift
I'm,
up their arms. And if you saw, but if you saw a man do
yeah,
that, would you be, you'd be like, okay, whatever, that's a man. If anything, if you saw a man with like no armpit hair, you'd probably be a
it
little
would
bit
be weird.
confused.
Right.
Or like,
So
men
it's
who are hairless, they're viewed as like the weird ones.
totally, yeah. So I think we still have, I think you're right that we have a long ways to go. And I do think, for me at least, I think representation, like if I was
Totally.
as a kid, all I needed was like an older woman or girl to come up to me and say, look, I have hairy arms too. It's totally fine.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really probably all I would have needed.
Right. But because you're constantly seeing everything that's saying like the opposite of what you have, and if anything,
Exactly.
there's products that are geared towards getting rid of this problem. It's not even a problem. Like they're like
Right.
making it out to be a problem when it's already
Right.
not. Like at least again, like something like weight can sometimes come from like a health-based perspective or a much more like I mean, of course, there's all kinds of different levels of like healthiness and whatever, but I feel
Mm-hmm.
like with hair, there's really nothing unhealthy
Nothing.
or negative. I mean, unless you're like getting, I don't know, like crabs or something. Like I
Right.
had adult lice when I first moved to Los Angeles. It was very
Mm.
traumatic.
Ay, ay, ay.
I had like a rash all over my body for months, and I
No.
had no idea what it was because I'm like, who gets lices in like in their
Yeah,
early
if you're
20s?
not in contact with kids,
Well,
it's
so I
like,
babysat a couple times, but I was like, so it
mhm.
must have been from that. But so I went to like
Yeah,
a dermatologist and everything, and like I have like now I have like scar. I think of it as like a
no
funny story
way.
too. I have like small scars on my body from literally like because this is gross, but whatever. Like
Yeah.
you itch your head, and then you itch your and the like the shame because I'm lucky that I never really dealt with like back knee or anything, but I
Hmm.
for a couple of months literally had like this rash back knee, and I felt like this. And then as soon, lice is a bug. So of course you feel gross. But then I just felt like
Yeah.
this internal, like I had to tell my roommates and everything. And I'm like, ugh. So like that's a case when I was like, I don't want hair or whatever.
Right, right.
But even that sort of thing, it's like it happens, and it's and then I didn't do anything wrong. It doesn't. If anything, I learned a lot about lice, and so lice go to the more
Right.
clean hair. They don't go to the dirty hair.
Exactly.
So all those stigmas of the kids who are dirty and have lice, but
Hmm.
I never had it when I was a kid. And you just think about too, like those sort of things is like, oh, the kid has lice and they're gross, and it's usually something that like you can't control,
Exactly.
but it spirals out of control sometimes if you're an adult and they don't know what's going on with you. uh, but that's such a thing. It's like a funny story for me. Like I have no shame in telling people that I'm like, yeah, I had lice and I had this rash, but like at the time, I wasn't going around telling people, hey, I just had lice and
Yeah.
all this stuff. And so we need like more. I was going to say we need more lice representation, but I don't know if you are familiar with the show. I'm sorry, with Andrea
I
Savage.
love that show. It's really,
There
really
was an
good.
entire episode in the most recent season about lice, and
Yeah,
that I felt very
it was
seen
great.
during that. That was literally my experience. And so I'm like, we need more stuff that's like body hair adjacent, if anything, where it's like, maybe we
Yeah.
won't be getting like the woman fully, hairy legs and armpits, as the norm, but maybe we'll get a little more sort of like acceptance of the weird stuff that happens when you have body hair and when you have
Yeah.
hair.
Yeah.
That's a little fun tangent story. So going along with that too, it's like one of the things I wrote down just sort of when reading your book was like, yeah, the representation or lack of body hair in the media compared to the representation of different body types and different things, especially in the past decade, is really not present at all. And I know you mentioned High Fidelity, and like I watched the show and like I didn't even think about that, and that's very telling that it's just sort of like we accept these like hairless people as sort of the norm. And so in a dream world, kind of like what would you like to see, and what's because there's the difference between like acceptance and tolerance. And so obviously we want to go
Yeah.
for actual like acceptance. We don't want people to just see it and be like, oh, that's okay. We want people to be like, that's normal. So if you could give advice to people in the media, or if you could be sort of like a body hair consultant, what kind
Yeah.
of stuff would you like to see, and how would you approach this in a perfect world?
Yeah. I mean, I'm really curious to see what it would be like to show like a professional woman going into her office with hairy legs.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that's still the biggest, still for me, I think I would feel like when I went into my office job for my day job, like I would wear, if I had hairy legs that day, because I got in a phase of just not shaving my legs ever, which felt really nice. But I felt like I had to wear pants. It just didn't feel
Mm.
like I could do it, just because I know I probably would be the only one. Um, so yeah, I think it would just be nice to have more characters on TV that had, I think, like hairy legs are really missing. And I'm curious how that'll kind of happen. I don't know.
Yeah, because if any, like we see, like the montages usually like during a makeover of like or like someone getting ready, like they're
It's always
waxing and like
waxing.
the leg up, and then, I mean, of course, it goes back as far as like the Venus song, like I'm your Venus.
Yeah.
Like it's just so ingrained in you from such a young age that it's like shaving your legs and being hairless is acquainted with beauty, and if you're hairy, you're like the old
Exactly.
crone who. It's just like it doesn't make sense. I mean,
Yeah.
really absurd. I'm trying to think if they're like, I mean, I know like Miley Cyrus was sort of, she doesn't shave her arms, or she didn't, or her armpits for a while, that she was like kind of vocal about that, but it's like, you really can't, it's also how do you feel about it being more of like a hippie sort of like I know we just talked earlier, but sort of like the unhygienic component, like how do
Right.
you grapple with sort of like, being a hygienic regular person, but also maintaining your body hair and like that sort of cognitive dissonance of like hair equals unclean, but you know that you're a clean person, but like your people are telling you that hair is unclean.
Yeah, I think it's for me, I wonder if it's just like a feeling of looking messy, I guess.
Mm,
And maybe it needs to be, I mean, Disney has issues, but I wonder if it needs to be like a Disney princess who's hairy or something to like
totally.
start young.
Wait, that's like such a good idea. Just like the Disney princess who's hairy, but it's like not a thing. It's not like she's like
it's not
the
part
werewolf
of the plot of the
yeah, it's not the plot.
right.
I've definitely, now I'm trying to think, there was a recent book I read by Dawn O'Porter. She's like a British author, and one of the women
Mm-hmm.
in her novel has that condition where you sort of like have hair all over you. And actually, you should check
Oh,
it out, because actually at the end she ends up like she starts out being like, this is like, I need to cover up, I need to shave all the time, like nobody can see me like this, blah blah blah. And then she ends up just like being like, fuck it, and letting her hair grow out and just like being herself.
oh, that's awesome.
I think it's
What's
called
the name of
So
that?
Lucky by Dawn O'Porter. It's about like three
Cool.
different women and sort of like accepting themselves for various reasons. And yes, one of the characters definitely like deals with body hair very viscerally. Has like a donut
Interesting.
on the cover. And it was
Oh
also,
yeah, I see
yeah,
it.
it's like very weird because it like, I didn't know what to expect. Like I just saw it recommended somewhere, and it like, I hate to
Mm-hmm.
be like chick lit or whatever, but it kind of looked sort of like a lighter, whatever, like fluffy novel. And it was actually like super deep and interesting,
Oh,
disguised as a
cool.
lighter women's lit novel.
Yeah.
But going off of that, what other stuff do you like to read? Like, what else do you like to consume besides obviously your own fun stuff? Um, what are you reading? What are you watching? What are you consuming?
I love Samantha Irby. She's one of my
I don't think I'm
favorites.
familiar with her.
Oh, she's awesome.
Smith Irby.
Her books are
Oh,
Samantha
Samantha
Irby.
Irby. Oh, I was like, oh, I know Samantha Irby. I was like, who's Smith Irby? Oh,
No,
Samantha Irby. I freaking love.
yeah,
Do you get her Judge Mathis newsletter?
yeah.
Yeah, I love her.
So I love her. Her stuff is great. What did I just read? I just read Writers and Lovers, which was really good.
Was it
And I
Lily
also,
something wrote that?
yeah.
Yeah, I liked that.
And then Milk Fed by Melissa Broder is amazing. I just
Melissa
finished
Broder
that in
is
like a
my
day.
queen. I love her so much. Like if she
Yeah.
was, I reached out to her to see if she wanted to be on the podcast. I haven't heard back, but I know she's like got a lot going on. But do you listen to
Yeah.
her Eating Alone in My Car podcast?
No, but I want to.
You should. It's literally just like her eating alone in her car, talking to you, and you're like,
I
feel
love
like
it.
you're her best. I haven't read Milk Fed yet. I have it, but I know that it's all about like there's a character named Rachel, and it's all about eating disorders and Judaism, and I'm like, I can relate.
It's amazing. It's just like food and sex, and it's so good.
And I live in LA,
like
so I think it's all
book.
like when I was just looking through, I was like, oh, these are like she literally like
It's like
delves
taking
into
all
the
the
LA
boxes.
food scene. I'm very excited.
Yeah, it's so good. But I definitely went through a phase where I just didn't have the attention to read during all of this, but now I'm getting back into it and it feels really good. So those are just my latest.
So back to your book. So you also just had your book come out 2 months ago. So if you want to talk a little bit about like what was, from obviously it stemmed from you already had this portfolio of illustrations and sort of like established a blog and a name for yourself, but how you sort of transition from that to writing a book and, from the pitching and the editing and then what it's like to sort of wait and then have it published we're still in the middle of a
Yeah.
COVID. So broad question, but if you want to expand a little bit on that.
Yeah. So I was posting a lot of this work on Instagram only. And then I have a really close friend who's also a Yenta who is in the publishing world. And she was basically saying when the Instagram was really picking up, she was like, you really should strike while the iron is hot and just reach out to agents and pitch. I'd been wanting to write a book for a while, kind of based on these posts that I was doing. But I didn't quite know what shape I wanted the book to take yet. But I basically cold pitched a bunch of agents. And what I did is I looked in the back of books that I loved and just saw who they thanked in the acknowledgments, and then looked them up and saw, who worked with illustrators, and kind of seemed to be looking for people who did work more similar to mine. And so I cold pitched a bunch of people and then had some meetings and ended up going with my agent who I work with now, who just felt like she kind of understood. She understood where I was coming from as a creative person and kind of the larger goals that I had. And she worked with some folks that I love, that I'm a fan of. So she seemed like the right person for me. And with her, she kind of helped me develop a pitch, which basically to pitch to publishers, you're kind of just proposing, like, this is the book I want to make.
Right. You haven't actually written it yet. This is just sort of like the idea and the concept. And then of course it helps that you already have like this existing body of work that you can show to them, sort of to boost it.
And I think it depends on, because I know there are people who pitch agents with a manuscript. So I think it's different for different people. But in my case, it was kind of a proposal for a book,
right,
where I wrote up an outline of, each chapter, what it'll cover.
So did you already have an idea, like going in, like, so the format of the book, for those who haven't read, is you kind of chronicle a different part of the body for each chapter from it's a head to toe memoir is the subtitle. So you literally go from head to toe. So was that sort of the plan for the book at all times, or like going from the beginning?
I had an early conversation with a friend about how I might want to structure the book, and she was kind of like, head to toe would be cool, of having each chapter a dedicated part of the body, just because clever. It's a nice way to organize a story, and it helped keep me organized. So that was always the idea. And then in kind of talking it out, I kind of landed on that concept of starting with kind of going through motions of, a young girls aren't born insecure. So I kind of wanted to track what different inferences did I make as a kid that made me reject certain parts of my body. And then what kind of conversations was I having with my friends that helped pull me out of it, and kind of take a bit of a step back and say, if my body's doing it, it's not wrong.
Right.
So that's where, through conversations with friends and my agent, it kind of formed a clearer arc that I guess the, illustrations I did alone wouldn't really fit. So that kind of was, once I had that plan out, I wrote up the proposal, which basically just outlined all of that information. And then I painted I think it ended up being 2 or 3 chapters worth of kind of how I thought the chapter would take shape. And then from there, once I had meetings with different editors at different publishing houses, kind of once I landed with my people, then it just was a series of, sketching, submitting the work, and then getting some feedback and just kind of chugging along through each section.
So did you do like the drawings and the writing like at the same time, or did you kind of lay it out all with the illustrations and then fill in, or how did it work like that?
It was funny because it was obviously the first time I was writing a book. So I kind of didn't know like what process would work best for me. And I don't even remember how. I think at first I had started writing, like I would write out the chapter and then make the illustrations after. But slowly I kind of learned that it was more interesting and fun for me to lay out kind of where I wanted to go with the chapter, the points that I wanted to hit. And before writing it out, decide what imagery would be best to tell that story. Because I think with the initial approach, it felt very plug and play. Like I'd say,
Yeah,
okay,
I felt
well,
like
I
two
said
in your
this and
head.
this.
Do you think that you're more of like,
Yeah.
I mean, because I mean, of course, they're both like artistic mediums, but they're so different because usually,
Yeah.
they say like a picture tells 1,000 words or whatever. Like, do you
Right.
consider yourself? That's like a hard question, but like, would you say you're more of an illustrator or you're more of a writer? Did this like help solidify one of those identities more for you, or did it kind of show you that you can balance both?
I think that's a really good question. There are times where I feel like the way I've written something is more fun and expressive, and times when I think the way that I've drawn it has more humor in it. But I definitely think what I learned through writing the book, or what I'm still learning, but the book really helped, was kind of where to put the emphasis and where the words packing more of a punch, and what kind of imagery can help elevate the words and make it more funny or make it more gross, etc.
Because it
But
was
that
so
definitely was
interesting.
a
Sorry. I was
oh
just
no,
gonna,
that's okay.
you
It
did
was
like a really good job of balance. Like I think sometimes I'm much more of like a reader and a words person. So I don't tend to gravitate towards and I think that's just like a stigma inside me. But also, I mean, when we think of a graphic novel, we traditionally think of it as much more of, your eyes are first drawn to the images and then the words and the story kind of come secondary. I mean, especially when superhero comics and going back to that.
yeah.
So to have it be such a wonderful sort of like coming of age and acceptance story for that was so personal, it could have just been a memoir, but it definitely wouldn't have had the same sort of gravitas. And then also the fact that these are your own personal drawings. It's not just sort of an illustrated companion. It's like, this is how I'm able to express myself in two different mediums. And because your drawings are so realistic and wonderful, and we don't get so many of those, I'm like, I hope that I want like an Ariella Elovic, like prints in my room. You should sell prints. You should sell merch from Cheeky.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I've been thinking about it. I definitely want to figure out how to share the drawings with people, because I think they are fun, and
they're so fun. I'm like, I would love, I mean, I can't even think of the brands, but there's stuff, I could see it being like a brand and like to have it in like different stores and like, or maybe you have like a greeting card line with your face on
Oh,
it.
thanks.
I support you more. I mean, I'm excited to see what you do for your writing too, but I think the drawings too are really wonderful. And so I'm not familiar with like the graphic design and illustrating process and any of that sort of visual medium stuff. So like, how does that work? Like, how do you do the art?
Usually what I do, and I was just listening to this podcast interview with Linda Barry, who's an like iconic comic artist, but she was talking about how she's doing a lot of research working with 4-year-olds and kind of like drawing with them and going back to that. And she was saying how a lot of times drawing is what gives ideas, and kind of, I think what was really helpful for me with the book is, again, coming up with that like general outline of how I want to go, and then kind of flipping through my mind and thinking about what images would be the most fun to kind of push that story forward, or what stories from my childhood would be the most fun to push the story forward. And so usually the way I start, I keep a journal that's my diary kind of, but then I'll also do a lot of drawing in there. So if I ever felt stuck on something, or with the book specifically, I would print out these like templates it was basically the page size. So I kind of understood how things would be laid out on a page. And I would just sketch out kind of the stories that I was thinking about. And I would sketch those in pencil. And then once those were sketched out, I would then trace them onto my like watercolor paper I have. It's like, I don't know if you can even know, but
is it like
it's just like a
cardstock, or was it like a different
kind of, it's a bit,
or is it like ridged
it's textured
on
like, yeah, exactly.
I think I know from like middle school art class or something like
yeah,
that.
yeah.
So it's all hand drawn and hand painted. Do you do any of that like digital? I know that there's like people draw on iPads and then it comes on the screen or something, or you're much more of a like
I
traditional.
don't. I definitely want to try it out just because it's kind of cool how immediate it can be. But I definitely really like working with my hands. So I would trace it. And then I watched so many movies and TV and like listened to so many podcasts and books on tape, which was really fun. But yeah, I would paint them and then scan them into the computer. And then there was some like I could do like color editing that way
Oh, okay, cool.
or, add some details here and there that I couldn't get with. I like to sometimes go in and add like sometimes I'll add patterns with digitally, but most of them were painted, the ones in the book.
Very cool. That's so fun. I'm like very impressed. I'm like in my mind, I'm always, like, oh, this should be so easy to draw this. I remember when I was younger, I would get so frustrated in art class because I'm like, I'm picturing it so well in my mind. And then as soon as I take the pen to the paper, it does not. So I'm always jealous of people who can draw. Um, what was the easiest part to write and what was the hardest part to write?
The easiest part I think was either the boobs chapter or the tummy chapter, just because I mean, boobs are just like fun and funny and very
I know I'm always just
expressive.
like they're
So
like sacks of fat that just sit on you and you
yeah,
can play with. Like they're fun.
exactly. So that one was definitely felt like it kind of just like came out of me. And then the tummy one too, just because there was just I have a lot of thoughts and feelings about all of that. So it
Mhm.
didn't feel, I knew kind of where I wanted to go with it.
It's
The
interesting
hardest
because oh,
one,
sorry to interrupt. I feel like
no, go ahead.
the boobs and tummy, it's like those are almost like the two things that I think of when it's like the most sort of like where we think of body acceptance, but it's also like the individual parts of body acceptance are so different. And I feel like boobs, there's like
Yeah,
free the nipple and all that, but then and tummy
right.
acceptance too. And so I you can get into your hardest part, sorry, but it's like for me, I know I struggle with like my hips and my thighs are like my biggest things, and I'm like, I want to see more acceptance of
Mhm.
those. I'm like, great, we've seen. So I mean, it almost makes sense that those would be the easiest because like those are already the most like fun and like, oh, you have a tummy roll. I mean, it's still like I'm like, oh fuck, it's annoying, but it's like, oh, tummy rolls, whatever. It's like I remember when I was younger, I was so like I mean, you even look at the book covers of like Gossip Girl or whatever, and I was like, I don't look like
Yeah,
that, whatever. And now it's like, yeah.
yeah.
Sorry. So I like that those were
No,
your
it's okay.
they're like the fun parts that we celebrate them a little bit more now as opposed to like
Exactly.
commiserate about them.
No, I remember I would read Gossip Girl books to force like I thought that reading Gossip Girl books or like Women's Health magazine would make me not eat as much.
Women's health
Like
or
that was
Zen
like
book
my
or like those family circle. Literally, I would read them and I
yeah,
would be like, somehow this is going to make me not want to eat or like put me in the
exactly.
mindset of like a 40-year-old woman who knows how to like count calories, something stupid. The gossip,
Yeah,
those books
totally.
too. Now I feel like there was a long period of time where they had like real now I feel like there's not so much like the realistic person on the cover. There's a lot more cool like
Yeah.
graphics and stuff, but like the A-list, like all the click, like all
Yeah,
those
and
just
like with
this
like the hip bones sticking out, like the sharp that was like a big yeah.
yes, yes, and like just the time. I mean, now people wear crop tops and stuff too, but yeah, the hip bones sticking out because the jeans were so low. Damn.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
and so the
It's
hardest part to
everywhere.
write, if you sorry to have interrupted you.
But no, no, no. The hardest part was definitely the shoulders and back chapter, just because
Mm,
it was different than the rest in that it wasn't really about the physical parts of the body. Um, and I didn't want it to be too cheesy. But I think I struck like a pretty good balance of,
you
it
definitely
was
did.
it was definitely a lot more earnest than the other parts of the book, but um I definitely so that one was hard because I think at first it was like near the beginning, but it didn't feel like a beginning chapter. It felt
It was
like
more like
a
we needed to
ending
know
point.
you a little bit more to really
Yeah.
understand the scope of it, which I think was so great about it too. Is like we got to know you from head to toe, and then we get to know you like from using your external sort of things as a way to explore your internal. But when it's really just all about the internal, and we think I got your back, or like I'm holding you up,
Hmm.
like these things that we are so focused on, like literally holding somebody up, and that comes from the shoulders and the back, and like that's something I struggle with, like posturally. Like I didn't think about. I wish also like the care and keeping of your posture. I know there's like the care and keeping of you, the American
Hmm.
Girl book, but like I was, because
Mhm.
I'm 5'7", so I'm like a little bit taller. And so I know when I was younger, especially, like I just was always taller. And so I naturally would like slouch. And now I'm like, have to go to physical therapy for my back. And I'm like, this is bad.
Yeah.
Like, if only when I was younger. I mean, I know my mom and my parents were always like, don't slouch. Like, what I, like they would tell me, but it's really something that you don't think about. And like, you don't think that like girls also, they need to expand their shoulders and like keep their backs strong, and like that's something we just
Mhm.
think about like guys pretty much doing. Like girls can have strong shoulders
Yeah.
too, and girls can need to focus on their posture too. With the care and keep, I know the care and keeping of you, I'm sure you've gotten a lot of comparisons to as sort of like the only other really like realistic illustrated book out there for girls. Like, do you hope that this will sort of join that lexicon and be something that moms pass on to their young daughters, and something that can help start these conversations, obviously?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely my biggest wish from it, and I think that that's what and on one hand, I think the fact that we're in this like time of quarantine, it it almost made a nicer home for Cheeky just because we're
Mhm.
all with our bodies all
Right.
day and we have to grapple with them and appreciate them in a much stronger way than we've ever done before. So on one hand, it's like a really nice place for Cheeky to kind of step in. But the one thing that I really, really am bummed about is I would have loved to like see little girls with the book and kind
Mm,
of be able to see it in person because that's so awesome. But I definitely hope that the book is a pathway for mothers to speak with their daughters in a more like curious way about bodies and just be a lot more realistic with each other and kind of like we're all a product of like that patriarchy and what women's bodies are supposed to look
yep.
like in ways that are not helping us and not serving us. So it's definitely a tall order for mothers to be like this perfect beacon for their kids. But I think the important thing is just to be talking about bodies and
Right.
not letting, I think the most harm you can do is kind of not talk about these things because then we're going to be left
Mhm.
just assuming things need to be a certain way. So
Right.
I
This
think,
the younger we are, the more we talk about it. And like, even if it's talking about it from a place of like not understanding, or a place of
yeah.
discomfort, or just vocalizing that. And I think, again, really much more of like an acceptance movement than like a tolerant movement, because it's like anybody can
Hmm.
be okay with something or whatever, but to really just like be okay with it. Like, it's not even something you should be okay with. It's just like no one says anything when you have eyelashes, like, you know
Right. Exactly.
or too many eyelashes.
Yeah.
People want too many eyelashes. And it's like the sort of thing where, if you don't have eyelashes, then someone says something. So like, how do you feel about certain situations where like, or if a girl like, doesn't, we still think of women who like shave their heads as pretty, like taboo. Like, how
Yeah.
do you think a little, the irony of sort of like, if you don't have hair in certain places, like, is that weird, or you're expected to have like hair, or if your eyebrows are too thin now, like thick brows are in, like sort of the evolution of like a little bit more, like if you don't have hair in some places, like, do you think we'll get to a point one day where like maybe if you don't have hairy armpits, you're not cool?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a matter of kind of understanding that because I guess, I mean, men definitely face, and not to make it like a gender binary thing, but just for conversation's sake, I guess, if we're talking about groups of people, like men surely get told how they need to look also in
Totally.
certain respects. I
We're
think it's a
just
little bit
focusing
different just
on
because like,
that's a whole nother conversation too. Like,
yeah. But I think if we can get to and that's what struck me about the Britney documentary too, is like the way that when she was really young and the talk show host was basically saying like you have beautiful eyes, or
yeah, when she was like 10 and he's like, do you have a boyfriend? I'm like, would you ask
do you have a boyfriend, and like I'm a nice, like asking her if she thought he was a nice guy, like all of this stuff of just women
yeah,
having to make space and having to appease people. And I think that's one component of it, of just like let us be, like
right.
just please let us be. And then I think it's just this idea of like expectations of how to behave and what's right and wrong, and it's just such a fine line to walk. And so I guess out of Cheeky, I guess I'm just hoping that there's people just share their experiences and stories and how they connect with their body, how they feel about their body, and how they you know, their stories of what's been expected and how they just can't meet that expectation, and even like disappointments they have in their body, and just talking about it and understanding that, our bodies don't behave in certain ways that we want them to or wish they did, because it's not what our body's meant to do, and that's
Right.
okay.
And that's so easy to say, but I think it's so hard to
It's so hard.
internalize. And, I struggled with an eating disorder when I was younger. And then I just struggled with like disordered eating for a long time. And I didn't even look
Yeah,
at, I think there's also sort of, we can look at, okay, you're starving yourself, you have anorexia, you're purging, you have bulimia,
exactly.
you're overeating, you're binge eating, but there's also disordered eating where you're way,
Yeah,
I was like, I convinced myself like I didn't like pasta. And if I had a bite of dessert, like I felt so guilty. And I'm like,
same.
that's just like not a healthy way. But on the outside, I totally like looked fine. I mean, like I was
Yeah,
like a size 8, like I looked normal. And inside though, I was counting all my calories. Like I was being, and like, I couldn't talk to anybody about that. And it took me a long
no,
time
totally.
to realize that like, that might not be like a specific eating disorder, but that's not healthy. And that's a lot of other people
No.
felt that way too. And I think just being able to vocalize like how would, do you think that you could sort of like start a movement? I mean, there's some different movements, but like a safe space for people to like really talk about their bodies and talk about their discomfort without feeling like judged, and also without feeling this sort of like glorification of it too. Cause I think a lot,
Yeah,
it can also go the other way where it's almost like too disingenuous, where you're like, okay, that's great
totally.
that you're preaching acceptance and everything, but it just like doesn't feel like it's coming from a real place of like internal
Yeah.
acceptance. Like, do you have any thoughts or ideas on like how to grow the cheeky movement beyond just sharing the book and sharing the message, but like really like creating a safe space for women and just people who struggle, maybe not even just women, just people who identify with body issues and hair, and like a place for them to talk and feel comfortable about that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because, no one feels good every day, especially right now.
And if
Like,
you,
no
again,
one's
if you
doing
do, you
great.
are an AI, like you are a robot.
Yeah, like no one. And even like, I'm so grateful that now I'm cool eating pasta because it's so good.
I went
But
to
there are also
Italy when I
days,
was 16, and I literally was like, I don't want like
oh no.
like I'm like, I need to redeem myself. Like, and it's also
Yeah,
hard to, I mean, there's also, we grew up in an age where everything is documented in some way or another, maybe not like on the
right.
internet, but there's still like pictures of us from when we were younger and
Yeah.
when we were going through all that. And I'm sure you feel the same, where it's like really hard to like, I look at myself in those pictures from Italy, and there's the first thought where like, I'm like, wow, I was a lot skinnier. Haha. Or like, I thought I was fat.
Yeah.
I thought I was
It's
fat
like,
then. Haha. But it's also just like,
yeah,
it's sad to like put myself in those shoes where like I also like
totally.
had a host of issues and like wasn't diagnosed with anxiety yet, didn't know, like
Yeah,
understand myself. I was just a teenager, of course, but it's like sad to look and if I
it
had had
is.
a book like that, or a person I could talk to, or just more sort of normalization that like it's okay to eat pasta, and if you do feel bad, and also like if you do feel bad about yourself, that's okay. Like to also,
Exactly.
like you don't want to have to feel bad about feeling bad. I think that's also a
Right.
really hard thing to deal with.
Right. Yeah, I've been thinking I really want to experiment with maybe doing like Instagram lives with like, and I might call them like cheeky chats, and I'll have
Oh, I
maybe
love
once a week
that.
starting
Yeah.
out, to just talk with like either my roommate or another illustrator or
So
anyone
is
who
your
might
roommate
want to
a
hop
creative
on.
type too?
She produces a podcast. She produces Slow Burn. It's a
Oh,
podcast for
yeah, yeah.
Slate. So she definitely is in the creative field, but she's not an illustrator, but she is creative. But I think it would just be like, just the environment that we have at home of
Yeah.
just, I'm having a shitty day today. How are you? And just
Yeah.
kind of feeling, I think you're totally right that it's a double-edged sword, where preaching body positivity or self-love can feel very unattainable, because but I kind of think of it as like an unconditional self-love, in the
Mm,
sense of like, some days really suck.
yeah.
Like 2 days ago, I need to somehow like figure out Instagram in a way that won't depress me. But I think there are days where I wake up and I open it again, even though I tell myself I won't. And I started off feeling fine. And then scrolling through, I'm like, everything I do is bad. And then 2 days later, I wake up and I'm like, I'm the most talented person that's ever
Yeah.
walked the planet. Like, we all have those ups and downs. And I think, what helps me get out of it is I just know that everyone else is going through that too. And I'm very lucky to not have like a chemical imbalance that actually, I mean, I can't speak to that. And I don't have that obstacle. But I'm
Must be
able to
nice.
like,
No.
but I'm able to like regulate myself. Like I'm like, there's people who can't basically
Right.
without help. Not that I'm not in therapy, but I mean,
No,
like,
no, it's
you
totally,
know,
and it's different for everybody too. Like I have anxiety
yeah.
and it's like manageable. And I, for a long, up until college, like thought that the way that I lived my life was like, oh, it's normal to like have obsessive thoughts over and over again and like ruminate on things
Yeah.
that you definitely don't need to. And up until like
Right.
I like took psychology and was like, oh, there's like a name for this and sort of like
Right.
destigmatizing that. And it also took me like 5 or 4 years to really like figure out what medications worked for me, like find the right doctors.
Mm-hmm.
And like I have a very minor case. So like kudos to people like who can like, if medication and all that works for people too, but like I think that it's all about being self-aware too. Like I understand that like
Exactly.
there's nothing wrong with that too. And like I'd love to also reach a point though where like I don't need medication because who knows, but there's also there's other chemical imbalances. Like I can't speak to depression and I can only imagine how difficult that is. I mean, each
Mm-hmm.
even if you don't have a mental health disorder, like everyone's brain is so different that the way that you
Yeah.
perceive something is not going to be the same for anybody else. But I think that there's commonalities that we can share and bring together. And like just because you don't have a mental health disorder or a chemical imbalance doesn't mean you're any less entitled to like feel that way, or
Totally.
because you're still a human. Like if we
Yeah.
want to it goes the other way too. It's like we don't want to we want to accept people who have mental health disorders, but we also just want to accept people who feel shitty. You don't have to like have depression to feel. That was a big thing
Exactly.
I think when we were younger too. It was like, oh, are
Yeah.
you feeling sick? It's like, okay, well, if you're, I was like, I feel weird and uncomfortable and like, I don't want to go to school today and deal with everything, but like, I don't have a fever. I don't have like nausea, like understanding, especially for
Right.
younger girls, like the sort of, mental health days. And you might not fully like understand your
Yeah.
anxieties and your depressions and all that, but like, sometimes you just need to
Yeah.
like take a step back. And I think that we don't give enough space for young girls, especially when they're in like the rat race of freaking high school and middle school, to like breathe and take a
Yeah.
second and like
Totally.
have some introspective moments. And maybe your book can do that.
I hope. Yeah.
Take a mental health day and read cheeky and take some time to read for yourself.
Yeah. I hope that this time is like reinforcing, sometimes you just, because I think with work now, people are kind of like, when someone says I need to take a mental health day, it's like, okay, we get it. Like, no problem,
Right. But even
whatever.
like
And
3 or 4 years ago, that's like
people still needed mental health days. Yeah.
they've always needed them, but we just to like actually put a name to that too, because I would sometimes feel guilty if like, especially in college, or I was like, I don't really like I'm just like feeling like I don't want to go to class. Like I'm just like not feeling great, but it's like, I can
Yeah.
just own that like I don't feel great instead of lying, being like, oh, I have a cold or what, like,
Hmm.
something. It's like, why do we accept that? Why can't we just accept that someone needs a mental health day? And now I think we're at least kind of on the path to that.
Totally.
So what do you have any other projects or anything that you can talk about that you're working on?
I definitely want to work on a piece, like some sort of essay to pitch around about Mother's Day.
Mm,
And I'm thinking about some sort of thing, like we were talking about earlier, of just generational, like women's relationships with food and how we can kind of be better mothers and daughters and sisters to each other and friends, and just how we kind of relate to our bodies and talk about our bodies with each other. Um, but yeah, other than that, it's
I mean, you
just been,
just had a book
if
come out 2 months ago, so
I'm I would love to write another book. I don't know what it would be about yet, but
you write like a cheeky companion guy where it's like, you have everything from the book, but then it's more of like a sort of not self-helpy, but it's like, okay, list this, or like a note, like you can write in the
yeah,
book
a
like
journal would be
a
fun.
journal, or like have it be, again, if we're really thinking about this for young women, I'm like, I would love if I could have like had this and then had like questions that I could like talk to my mom about, like,
Yeah.
so I mean, I'm just getting spitballing, but I think
No, I
that,
love that
or
idea.
maybe
That's
the cheeky
awesome.
coloring book, I could see that too.
That would be very fun. You can color your underwear, whatever
Oh my
color
God, I
period
love.
you're having today.
Yeah, I love that. Like fun because like we don't see anything
Draw
like
your
that.
poop. Yeah.
Draw your poop. Yeah, did you obviously everybody poops? Was that did you read that when you were young?
Oh yeah,
Of course, the
I love that
iconic
book.
book.
But no, I was actually, before I pitched Cheeky, I was working on a book that was going to be like a spoof of that, like Not Everyone Poops, about my issues with constipation and IBS. But so maybe maybe I'll do
That's
a
so
poop
funny
thing.
because I think I mean I personally don't have IBS, but I know that like SIBO and IBS and everything, those are also becoming slightly more like normal and
I'm seeing IBS commercials a lot. I
are
don't know
you
if it's
okay? That's
because
awesome.
like,
Maybe they're just
yeah,
starting.
I don't know, like, I don't know why, but I'm seeing them a lot.
Or that we're
Or
home
like
now
people
and
are,
we're like understanding like, oh,
yeah,
maybe it's not my environment. Like, because I think a lot of
yeah,
people
maybe
like
I'm just
blame it
like
on like,
not
oh, I drink
pooping.
too much coffee, or I'm just like, I'm always
Right.
running around or
I'm
whatever. It's like, no, maybe something's like actually in your body. Like,
yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think I'm even like just seeing like more people like on Instagram, like even people, some influencers
Hmm.
that I follow or whatever, influencers that they're like talking about their stuff and they previously like would not have. And so I think that that's
Hmm.
cool. But again, still like a long way to go before it's like normal and just part of everyday life.
Yeah.
Well, this has been absolutely wonderful. We've almost been talking an hour. Before we go, I guess if you had to do a TV or movie version of Cheeky, who would you cast to play Ariella in a dream world?
Oh my gosh.
I just came
Wow,
up with that
that's a really
question.
good question.
That was came up with that on the fly, and I'm sorry because I know
Whoa,
that's
who
a
would
hard
I want?
question.
I mean, I love Rachel Bloom,
Oh, that
but
would be
I
good.
would need someone hairier.
Right.
So, but honestly, I don't know who's hairy because no one's hairy on TV right
Right.
now.
I'm sure Rachel Bloom is probably hairy. She just doesn't show it, but she has lighter hair.
I feel like she has lighter hair.
So you
So
need someone with
yeah,
like
it
the dark
wouldn't,
hair because obviously that like shows. I'm always like with
I
blonde
need a
people too. I'm like,
unibrow. I need like, maybe it's not someone who's known and who, what was that movie that Mindy Kaling did? I mean, I'm not Indian, but I would want it to be someone Jewish and hairy, she had a show or a movie on Netflix. Never Have I Ever.
oh, the TV show
Have
Never
you
Have I
seen
Ever.
it?
Yeah, yeah. Um,
Oh yeah, it was a TV show. And she like, maybe, I don't think she had a unibrow, but she definitely had more of like,
the main girl.
I think as a kid I would have related to
Yeah,
her.
because especially like people of color and Indian people. I remember my friends when I was younger, like my friend who was Indian was always like complaining, like, why can't we see more of those people?
Yeah.
They struggle because I think we also now, if we see someone who's like hairy, it's like, a white girl. And it's like, well, other people have issues with their hair as well, just
Hmm.
because maybe their skin is not showing it up as much. Now, yeah, I feel like Never
Right.
Have I Ever. The girl that was also like her first acting role too, the main girl. I think she was really awesome.
Yeah, she was great.
You kind of look a little bit like well, Elliot Page, I guess now. Ellen, you kind of look like Ellen,
Oh,
but now Elliot Page, but
yeah, maybe
when
if
they
she got,
identified as a female,
yeah,
if but not
maybe we
hairy
get a
enough.
unibrow on her.
Or that's the
And
unibrow. Oh my god, I was gonna the person or let's say the portrayal of unibrows in pop culture is just like the first thing I think of is Franz Stalanovskevich from Dodgeball. If you remember
oh yeah,
the
yeah,
German
yeah.
woman, that is like
Hmm.
all I think of. And I'm like, but she was
That's
kind of
so
a
funny.
badass woman. So and they actually didn't
Totally.
and she fell in love and maybe you should explore a little bit of that because she fell in love
I
and
should rewatch.
they don't have her change her appearance. I mean, definitely it's for comedy, but she
Right.
falls in love and doesn't have to shave anything.
Love that.
It's a great movie. I mean, definitely problematic, but they could actually be a pro body hair acceptance film for women. Um, on that note, thank you so much for talking to me and taking some time out of your day. It was wonderful to read your book, and I think getting to talk to you has made me appreciate it even more. Is there a particular place you want me to like link it down below? Amazon, or do you have like a different bookseller you like?
I can give you a link that's either it's like a landing page that has
Yeah,
Amazon, Bookshop,
cool.
Barnes
Give
and
me that, and
Noble.
then I'll link that down
I'll send you
below.
that.
And we'll put your Instagram, and we'll put all your stuff. Yeah, send me what you want to put, and I'll put it all
Awesome.
here. And check out Cheeky if you haven't already. It is out now. It is a wonderful, especially for people who say they're not big readers because they're like overwhelmed by like a 300-page book. Check this one out because it's a picture book for adults, basically. I hate to say that, but you know,
No, that's
easy.
awesome.
It's easier to read. If you're not as a wordy person, it's, you know, it's quite easy to read, and it's just as enjoyable as a regular memoir would be, if not more. So thank you very much, Ariella.
Thank
Until
you.
next time, everybody, stay reading.